You're on mute, Axel.
Okay, so let's start again. It's a great pleasure to have you all around and start this this conversation about aging and longevity. My assigned role is to explain the worldwide demographic transition, show facts and explanations. What I particularly appreciate is is that we are such an international crowd in this dialogue. And it's really the global scientific cooperation which makes this dialogue so special. Now, you will forgive me if I put the center of the universe here, which is share land, where the share countries are cooperating on actually collecting the facts and searching for explanations. But we are part of a larger community. You see all the countries who have similar aging structures. And I want to stress today that we also have colleagues in the Ukraine and also in Russia. Actually, in Russia, the Russian share was supposed to be inaugurated in 3 weeks. That event obviously has been canceled. Anyway, the topic is the demographic transition. And let me be very, very brief on this because I think most of you know the mortality rate has fallen dramatically historically and somewhat later than also the birth rate went down. This transition period in some countries has lasted about 100 years or even longer. In Asia, it's much, much shorter. Therefore, also the resulting increase in population size has been just very, very fast in Asia, whereas in the European countries it has stabilized. Now, you know these facts. Interesting are actually the causes. Now, the cause for decline of mortality is essentially progress in public health. It's not only medicine, but mainly hygiene. For example, just simple clean drinking water. But also social changes. People can afford a refrigerator. The labor conditions have changed. Education is much better. The decline of fertility has similar causes, which are rooted in education and the insight that if you have fewer kids, they may have a better life, not only the kids themselves, but also the mothers and the fathers. It is not so much the contraceptives who change the birth rate, but really this quality-quantity trade-off where people now choose quality rather than quantity. Now, the point I want to make is both the decline of mortality and the decline of fertility are based on things which are basically good. There are progress of humanity, and we do not want to change these deep causes of the demographic transition. Now, this puts us in a situation, and I think this is the fundamental insight I want to tell you, is we should enjoy this progress and adapt to the implication rather than resist the adaptation and lament about the implications. So we have a lot of lamenting, particularly in Europe, about longer working lives, or that GDP will not grow as fast as we used to because we have more older people and less younger people. That's the side story. The main story is really that we had made big progress. We should enjoy it, and the adaptations are bearable. But the fact is, the world doesn't work this way, unfortunately. And let me somewhat exaggerating put the world in two parts. The developed world essentially has chosen, particularly in Europe, to resist adaptation. We have early retirement, we have productivity decline, and actually some data I would show you shows a health stagnation. In the US, health actually goes back. In the developing world, we are not yet enjoying the progress. There is no retirement in many countries. People work until their death. Productivity is only slowly increasing and health is still very, very low. Of course, there are lots of countries sort of in between, particularly in Asia, you know this. Now, to explain this, forgive me if I concentrate on Europe and the developed world, because that's what I know about, being a European myself. So go there. Early retirement, well, much of that is caused, and we have good evidence that this is just bad design of pension systems. The productivity decline, that is much more a complicated story. But we see, at least in the European countries, less so in the United States or Canada, that pensions crowd out education. And we all know that education contributes heavily to productivity increases, but we crowd it out by social expenditures. Now, health stagnation, that is something new. And we are still speculating on the causes here. I'll show you some data, but we do see deteriorating health habits, also, particularly in the US, but also in Europe. So let me go sort of by the way of example through these three resistances to adaptation. And my point is using, that's why I started with a slide you saw in the very beginning, research using international data. Why is international data so important for actually understanding the explanations and not only the facts? That is, you need variation, both in what you want to observe, for example, demography, changes in demography. See, for example, on this slide, the old age dependency is hugely different in the Anglo-Saxon countries and Scandinavia vis-a-vis the Mediterranean countries and Japan, factor 1 to 2. But we also have a lot of variation in policies, which really helps us better to understand why we see these outcomes. And just as an example for outcomes, you see the dependency ratio on the horizontal axis and pension expenditures on the vertical axis. They do correlate, 50% correlation. That's quite nice. But the other 50% are not explained by demography. So a lot of pension depends actually on other things than demography. And sort of digging deeper there is something where you need international comparisons. You would not see this in a single country slide. You need the different countries to actually identify these kind of mechanisms behind this slide. Anyway, let's go back to the first example I have shown you earlier. Early retirement caused by bad design of the pension systems. And what I just summarize in this and the other two examples where I dig deeper is a project which is called the International Social Security Project, which is now led by Courtney Coyle and myself. Used to be led by Jonathan Gruber and David Weiss. What we find is an amazing correlation between the average employment rate and how it changed over time and the financial loss when people postpone retirement. Now, this is sort of the, Olivia, you will know, a variation on a theme which is 20 years old. And the interesting thing here, it upholds with much newer data. And when you use both cross-sectional, international, and intertemporal variation. So it's a very stable finding, and it shows that when the financial losses, when you postpone retirement, because the present value of your pension declines the later you go into retirement, you see when this financial loss is largest, employment rate is lowest, and vice versa. Very nice, strong correlation. You can dig deeper and do all kinds of econometric analysis, which has a causal interpretation in addition to these correlations you see. But that is the main message. So international data helps to find the explanations for those facts. Second example is the sources of productivity decline. Now that's a long story, and I don't have so much time here. My claim is essentially pensions which crowd out education. Now this is based on work which is partially done here in Munich with colleagues of ours, partially added by our own research. Now the first regression showed how total factor productivity is affected by aging. And you see that it's strongly significant, the negative effect, the higher the old age dependency ratio, the lower total factor productivity in a cross-section intertemporal panel of countries, either a fairly large sample of countries, emerging countries and OECD countries, but it also holds for the OECD countries. Then at the right hand, you see public sector spending increases in terms of health spending, but not significantly, but highly significantly in social protection, which is mainly pensions. But it decreases with the old age dependency in terms of education. So that shows you the crowding out effect. Again, it's a very robust finding using various data sets and various methodologies. Now, the link in between is, of course, the little graph at the bottom here with number 2, which links public expenditures on education with labor productivity. And you see that as everybody knows, a very close correlation. And I think that's one of the big dangers, obviously, of the demographic, not of the transition itself, but of the outcome, being in an aging society. We run the danger of underspending in education and overspending in social protection. The third example, then my time is slowly over, I'm afraid, is to understand what is going on in health. And that is a new study we are doing in using the SHARE data with some surprising findings for Europe. Just to get back to what SHARE is, SHARE has by now 9 waves of data, almost 20 years, a lot of respondents, actually the largest of the aging studies with now more than 600,000 interviews. The point here is we have enough variation to understand age, to separate age and cohort effects. And that is the very point I want to make here. I want to look at age by cohort for a given age, health by cohort for a given age. Now, this has helped.
2 minutes.
Okay, this is helped by our retrospective life histories and a lot of knowledge we know about the health of the people, including blood. Okay, so what we see is shocking, at least for Europeans, because you see that the further the cohorts go, if you go from left to right, then the health deficiency, which goes down and down and down, lucky we, but now is stalling. So from the 1950s and 1960s cohorts, particularly among men, you see that the increase of health or the decrease of health deficiency gets stalled. Now, we all knew that this is the case in the United States, but now it also seems to happen in Europe. We did some preliminary research looking at health habits, smoking, drinking. These are people born in the 50s. These are not people born in the 80s. The 80s smoke less and drink less, but the people in the 50s have bad health habits. Anyway, this is my time is over. Let me conclude. The power of international cooperation in generating facts and identifying explanations is huge, and we really need this international comparison. So I'm very glad about this event which we have today. The fundamental challenge is to enjoy the benefits of the demographic resistance rather than lamenting, but we do have to adapt to the implications. And in Europe, the adaptations are longer working lives, rebalancing pensions to education, and better beware of our health behaviors. Thanks a lot.